All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks for checking out the video. I'm sitting here with my good buddy and manager of data science, Alex Beene. I've known Alex for about 2 years now, Alex?
Yeah, it's been, I think, almost exactly 2 years.
Yeah. We got some beers when you were in town one day, and
I am manager of data science for a company called Front Door in Memphis, Tennessee. I was in Nashville briefly for about a year. That's how Jesse and I got to know each other. I got into my role in sort of a roundabout way. I started in analytics about 6 years ago, and I simultaneously started a master's in data science. And during that period, I got into NBA basketball for a little bit, sort of varied in industries, and ended up in a manager of data science role through sort of, I would say, the development largely of some of the stuff we'll talk about today on the technical side, but also some of the communication side that can get harder and harder as you get deeper and deeper in your technical skills.
Nice. And I think that's a super interesting bit just about your experience. You know, obviously you did some analytics for, what was it? OKC, right?
For the Thunder, the Pacers, and the Kings. So yeah. I was on the business side for the Thunder, and then I took internships to be in basketball with the Pacers and Kings.
Nice. That's so cool, dude.
Yeah, it was fun.
Well, so I guess, this is kind of pursuant to what you're just talking about. You went and got your master's, you worked with some basketball teams, and you've kind of gotten into this manager of data science spot. Could you kind of outline that transition for folks?
Yeah, absolutely. So I, really based on my interest, ended up in basketball. I really love the basketball side of things. And I think that'll preface some of the stuff we're talking about today. Because as you probably know, if you've gotten anywhere near data science or been involved with it, like 85% of your job is not actually data science. It's data cleanup, data wrangling, data munging, stuff you're going to do as an analyst. So it's not like, I think the term data scientist can really be overused because a lot of your work is the same as analyst. You just might use different tech. I really went into that more because I love the basketball, but I did get some really good tech experience, especially with the Kings. And so we did a lot of predictive modeling. And so after the Kings internship, I mentioned coming to Nashville. So I had a sort of midway role between the Kings and my current role. But all the while, I think my tech interest was always data science and predictive modeling. So it was really a matter of applying and getting a lot of help from Jesse on what to say and on what to do in interviews. So that was a lot of it.
Yeah. So you kind of hit on it just then, right? Data science is a term and this is really kind of the crux of our conversation today in some way, it's a term that gets thrown around a lot. And it doesn't mean the same thing at every single place. So what would you say are kind of some of the different, flavors of data science that you've seen out and about at different organizations?
Yeah, that's a good question, Jesse. And you nailed it. It's just different everywhere. I think it's different with what people look for, with what people evaluate as good or success. I think on one end of the spectrum is going to be like, you need a PhD. It helps to have gone to an Ivy League or Stanford or some, incredible education. And on that end of the spectrum, that's going to be more your deep learning, your AI and that sort of thing. A lot of my experience has been, I would say, like almost a step back, if you want to think of it that way, where there's two ideas with modeling. If you're familiar, there's you can build a model that's interpretable, so it's really easy to understand. Like you and me, like if you're interested in the housing market and I'm interested in the housing market, I can predict it, and then based on your acumen in the market, you can tell me like, hey, I see this or that's not jiving with the model, and we can go back and forth and then have both of our information. But for that type of thing, I need my models to be interpretable, right? So I've done a lot of that work, especially in basketball and in most of the industries, my current job too. But there's also then the side of it, which is the AI, the deep learning, where all you care about is predictability. So I don't really care as much about your insights on whether the model should have said this or that. I just care about getting the absolute best prediction that I can get. And so, and I think that's more what people think of with data science.
Yeah.
And for that, it requires a whole lot of computer programming.
Yeah.
And I would argue any data science is gonna involve computer programming. But for that stuff, you really need to know what you're doing with the programming.
Yeah. I would wonder, in terms of getting more towards the deep learning and AI and that sort of thing, a lot of times it seems like companies that are really doing that kind of thing are talking about humongous volumes of data. They're looking at macro sort of things, which I guess statistically makes sense, right? Because if you don't have a big sample size, you're not really predicting much, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? That's really intelligent, Jesse. One of my mentors at my company is the VP of data science, and he's new. He's got his PhD, studied at MIT, all this crazy stuff. And he's deployed 40 models into production at one of his companies at TripAdvisor. So he's got really great experience. And what you just said is one of the main things he mentioned on Monday in our talk is that when you're starting out, if you don't have just volumes and volumes of data, petabytes, at least terabytes, tons of data, then the stuff I mentioned before that I have experience in, that's super appropriate because you don't need to get into the. In fact, it's not even appropriate to get into the heavier AI stuff. Even before the deep learning, before the sort of stuff you might think about when you're reading, on what AI is and self-driving and all this stuff. Before that, you don't even need to get into that stuff with respect to AI if you don't have enough data. You think of if you're an analyst, you might think of 1 million rows as being big because Excel only fits 1.04 or whatever it is million. But that's very, very, very small data in comparison. When you think about what the Silicon Valley companies have, and, if you think about you're in Nashville, so think about the amount of data that Lyft has on a given day for the amount of rides when they're tracking it at every single moment. You're talking, I'm guessing petabytes every day that they're getting of data.
Yeah. Huge amounts, right?
Just massive. Yeah.
For where a data scientist fits organizationally, and maybe kind of what are some of the most impactful questions that they can solve?
Yeah, so I think, my bias is that it fits pretty much everywhere. I think, and I think the reason I say that is, I know you're good with me mentioning a book reference as much as you read, but Principles by Ray Dalio, we've talked about that book, right?
Yeah.
So Ray Dalio mentions this idea of he's going to have 15 stocks that are completely uncorrelated, right? Well, that right there is an example of the sort of, it's not as predictive, even though I'm sure they're running predictive models, but it's an example of that. What we talked about was sort of that first level of data science, which is highly valuable, obviously, as well as Ray Dalio has done for himself. So you can do a ton before you get into any of the sort of AI deep learning stuff. And so I would say, to answer the question more directly, the first place I would say, since that's my experience, is I think it does behoove an organization to have a data scientist. If you're the sort of director of real estate, right, and you're leading that charge, I think it behooves an organization to have me sitting next to you, building out these models to figure out what area is highly correlated with the market or with upticks in the last 5 years or whatever you're looking for, right? So in that case, it's not necessarily what most people think of when they're thinking about heavy data science. But then I think it also behooves an organization, obviously, and this is probably more what Silicon Valley type orgs are ran with, is to have a centralized data science unit, so that it's not it's not necessarily with one of your business units, but it's with its own centralized location, and all they're doing is data science. I think both are relevant. And frankly, I mean, just knowing the little I know about some of Silicon Valley companies like Google and Lyft and some of those people at Amazon, they're going to have all of it, right? I know, again, Andy Grove, I think, talks about the idea that you have your functional groups, and then you have your business units. And I think any tech company, any heavy tech company, is going to have your sort of first level data scientists, I would call them, in your business units, and then your more centralized data science in your functional units. So in my opinion, you really need both, and you should be headed towards both if you really want data science in your company.
Yeah. And I guess it probably is just going to depend upon, in some capacity, scope, right? Like
Yeah, true.
how much you can really do there. In terms of folks that, might watch this and maybe they're aspiring data scientists, right? I know you mentioned it earlier. You said, there's still going to be a lot of programming in data science, but the tool set might be different. Are there any particular skills, tool sets, education that somebody might need to pursue in order to get their first data science job?
Yeah, so I would say in general, even though I did finish a master's degree, I've actually moved more towards you don't need a degree, which sounds weird. I'm not going to say that my degree doesn't open some more doors that it wouldn't otherwise, but I think you can be better than me as a data scientist with 0 degrees. So I would say, in my opinion, and I was actually just mentoring someone today and told them this, I would just start learning. Coursera has some great courses. I think in general, your tech stack, it depends where you're coming from, right? I came from a math background. So for me, R made a lot of sense because R is really heavy statistic. Yeah. It's the best statistical language there is, open source. It's up to date with the latest and greatest statistical methods. But I would say unless you're heavy math or stats background, to just start learning SQL and Python every day. I think if you have a really good handle on SQL and Python, then the things that people I think about, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're around a lot more people than I am, but I think the things people think about with data science is like building some cool AI algorithm or, building some great deep learning algorithm. And I think that that, in my opinion, is not as hard to do if you really have a foundation of SQL and Python. Right. So to me, if you can just start every day learning SQL and Python, then that piece will come easier than the other way around, where there are definitely some people, I probably came more from this background, to be honest with you, but there are some people that know Excel and know some things that an analyst would know, maybe some SQL, and then they start learning, how to build a predictive model, for example, but they don't know the actual programming. In my opinion, that's a lot harder place to learn from than the other way around, where SQL and Python, but you need to figure out how to build a predictive model.
Right. Yeah. Well, so, and that kind of goes into, I think, a big curiosity of mine, just generally speaking, is in terms of data scientists, oftentimes, I think one of the areas where people, foundationally kind of maybe miss is some mathematical understanding, especially in the area of statistics, is going to be pretty important, right?
No, Jesse, you're exactly right. And I think I probably take that for granted because I had 2 degrees in math before I started this stuff. So I think I take that for granted, to be honest. Yeah. You're exactly right. I think, but I will say that for the deeper piece, what people think of when they think data science, at least I presume they do. Yeah. I think you need to start with programming there. I think for the stuff I've done, it's really helped that I had a mathematical understanding somewhat. Because the stuff that we're talking about, the sort of what I consider the first level of data science, that I really need to be able to explain to you. I don't need to just understand it. I need to explain to you why my model is saying what it is and why is it predicting that Chicago is going to be a really big market in 2022? Why is it predicting that? I need to explain that to you, right? So I think that's a good point. This is just an opinion, but I think if you're going to go the sort of first level, be with the business unit, be able to talk, back and forth with Jesse and that sort of thing, I think you need a mathematical background more so than if you go the second level of data science, which is all the deep learning AI stuff. You 100% need a deep understanding of computer science. And I think the two, obviously at some point, if you become good enough, become one. But I think if you're starting on that sort of second level, computer science is more important. If you're starting on the first, then maybe you're right. Maybe math and stats is more important than that first.
Well, I think you kind of led straight into my next question there, is what is the difference? I know you've read Good to Great. I've got Good to Great on my bookshelf because you suggested it. I haven't started it yet, but good is the enemy of great. What is the difference between a good data scientist and a great data scientist, in your opinion?
So I think it's the combination of the three, and this might be oversimplified just how I think about it, but I think like we mentioned computer science, we mentioned math and stats. Mm-hmm. I think if you combine those two with great communication, like to me, that's almost like the three huge components. Like to me, to be a great data scientist, like you said, good to great, to me, to be a great data scientist, you need all three for sure. So I think like, I would say in general, from what I've seen of the market, like I'm coming from a place where math and stats was pretty good foundation. My communication has gotten better over time. And then the computer science has slowly started. Like, I'm not going to say I'm like some example of like the greatest data scientist ever, but I would say computer science is the most lagging thing for me that I have to continue to learn. Right. So the way I think about it, and I might be missing something, but I think it's those three components. If you're great in those three, then you're going to be able to add huge value. And frankly, this stuff takes time. Like in my opinion, if someone says that they just rolled over and were a great data scientist in 2 years, they're probably lying. That's probably not a thing.
Right.
So,
right. Yeah.
Because even if they're great at like computer science and math, which maybe they are, like my buddy has a PhD in math. He is just brilliant at both of those, to be honest with you. Yeah. But I think even then you have to develop that communication piece, and that takes time. Like it's not easy to come from getting a freaking PhD in math and being a great data scientist to communicating in a way that I don't piss you off. Right.
Right.
So like they're very different skill sets.
And at the end of the day, it's like, if you're talking to a business unit, they're not going to understand if you're talking about some high level, it's like, I was reading The Man Who Solved the Market, and they were talking about Monte Carlo models. And it's like, you just went like way, it's like went way over my head. If you're talking to a business unit, there has to be some understanding of what in the world does this mean? You can say Monte Carlo, and I'm like, great.
And I think that's such a good question. And by the way, I've got that on my reading list. I think it's waiting to be on hold right now with the library. So from your recommendation, so I'm excited to read it. But yeah, I think like that's something I'm actually thinking about a lot right now, because like I've built this thing that to me became something you should just use. It's a better way of doing things. But, it's like Einstein said, like, I don't understand it. And I don't know if he said it the exact way, but like, I don't understand it if I can't explain it to my grandma who knows nothing about any more than like, 2 + 2 in terms of math. Right. Yeah. And so frankly, like even the stuff I've built, I don't understand well enough because I haven't been able to explain it to my bosses in a way that they want to use it. So, that's something I think we've talked about extreme ownership, right? With Jocko Willing.
Yeah.
I think of that a lot in data science because like I said, just take this thing I've built. It uses lasso. So it's got, you might consider that AI. It depends how rigorous you are with the definition. But to me, it's a very solid method of predicting. I used it in my thesis and I've used it in a few jobs. And it's like, to me, it's just, okay, let's use this. It's a better way of doing things. But that's not a good enough explanation when you have tons and tons of money on the line and people who really are hugely impacted by these decisions. And so like right now I'm thinking through, how do I explain that? And I think it starts with me understanding it better, right? Yeah. And then understanding in a way that like we talked about how to win friends and influence people. And that's something I reference a lot of data scientists that I'll mentor too. And you talk a lot about it. I think you probably live it out better than about anyone I've seen. But that's something that it's not just, okay, I comprehend it and I explain to you that you comprehended it. And as you well know, because you're great at it, it's that I explain it to you in a way that it impacts you and you care to use it, right? So it's not just that I can make you understand it up here. It's that I can make you understand it and you have a need now to use it, right? Like the whole, what's the chapter about like inspiring the other person and eager want or whatever? I think that's a huge necessity, because even if I help them understand it conceptually, first of all, I think the way a lot of data scientists approach it pisses people off, because the way my body language is talking to you right now when I'm explaining what lasso is, you might be getting the feeling that I think I'm smarter than you, right? Which immediately turns a lot of people off, especially people that have a ton of experience and success in business, right? Yeah. So there's just a lot of components to it, to being, to your question, like a great data scientist.
Yeah. Now, this is my ADD talking, but you mentioned it briefly, and I know we're kind of going off the kind of discussion track, but you mentioned the kind of trifecta of skills of a great data scientist, and that person would be able to provide big value to their organization. do you think that data science is sometimes a difficult area in a business to show value, right? Is like to show, we've either created this much revenue or we've saved this much time or money, that sort of thing. It's just more of a curiosity than anything.
Yeah, so this is just my experience, so it might not be right for other people that have done it, but my experience is that those functional groups we talked about, where they're centralized, that they do a better job of explaining like what their value is, because that's a lot of what they're doing is they have to tell the CEO why they exist, right? Yeah. Whereas someone that's in positions like I've been in, and I'll just take the bullet for this one, I don't think they necessarily do as good enough a job in general of that. I know I haven't in my probably around, I would say, 3 years of actual data science experience. Because, as soon as I generate a model, then I'm just giving it to my boss and then going back and building more models to generate to give my boss. Instead of, like, if you're in a totally functional data science group and I'm working with, you're a data scientist and we have 3 other data scientists and a boss who's a data scientist, like our whole job is that. So just to prove why we should exist as a function, we have to explain that to the CEO. Whereas for me, I've got the luxury that, like, you've been bringing in millions for our company as the, director of real estate. You've been bringing in millions for our company for 20 years. So I don't really have to justify why I exist. I exist because you've been doing that, right? So you're already, like, you're kind of doing that legwork for me, even though, I should take that, again, kind of extreme ownership to value what I'm doing so I can explain it to you and other people. Like, I think you're the one that sort of told me this on resumes, but instead of mentioning like, oh, I built this model in R that used Lasso, yada, 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 the data scientist might care, but I need to be mentioning, oh, I built this model that generated 15% higher profits for our marketing division in 2019. Like, that's something that, like, you as a director, you care about. Yeah. So long story short, I think just my assessment that these people in the business units, maybe like myself, haven't done a good enough job of it. Whereas the people in these functional units, they do a great job of it, and from what I've seen.
Yeah. Well, you highlight a super important differentiation to be made, right? Is sometimes you're going to have to look, if you're a job seeker in the data science field, you're going to have to look at that job description and really kind of go through it with a fine-tooth comb to say, is this a functional group? Is this a business group? Because the functional group is going to want, I did this in this language. At the end of the day, you do want to show some sort of saved company, blank amount of computing time or whatever, right? Whether it equates to some money value or not, doesn't really matter. But what was kind of the effective result of your work, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So really, my favorite question, and I know we talk about it constantly, is favorite books. If you were to list off 3 favorite books and maybe one, if somebody had to read a data science book, what would those be for you?
So it's funny. I think in this context, I think I'll have to find who the author is of the book that I read in my master's has definitely been my most foundational book in data science, and it's more statistical heavy. I would say I'll go ahead and start with, I already mentioned it, but I think especially in the data science path, you have to read How to Win Friends and Influence People. I think there's a little chapter in it. I still am struggling with this idea of not correcting people, because in my opinion, if you're with all data scientists, you have to have the ability to correct someone. But I think you can do it more of a Dale Carnegie type way. Yeah. So I would say starting out, you have to read How to Win Friends and Influence People if you're going to be in data science. In my opinion, if you want to do great at it, you can be great at the technical stuff and get fired in less than a year by just making people mad. So I would say another one that I would suggest for just anyone, like a great one, is Mindset by Carol Dweck. I know we talk about that a lot. Yeah. It's to me, it's foundational for how to think about just in my opinion, learning, growing, and not getting fixed into into one mode of thinking. And You said 3. I think I'll do 4 because one that we talk about a lot. But I think if you're going to be in analytics, or if you're going to care anything about analytics, you don't need to be in data science. Then you should definitely read Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. Like, you have to. To be honest, it's a long read in my opinion, unless you're just an incredible reader. But it's incredible to think about how biased we are in our thinking. And I think it'll blow your mind. And they actually give you examples that they'll take you through. And you'll see it. You'll see yourself making the mistakes, and it'll make you want to have an objective way to measure.
Yeah. I mean, I think I bought that book, maybe a year and 11 months ago, right after we met. And I think I'm about halfway through it.
I think it took me 2 years. It's a deep one. Unless you have like an economics degree or something, it's a deep, because, at least for me, I'll find myself looking words up and stuff.
Right.
Is it not so worth it though, just to understand why analytics and data science exist, to be honest, right?
Yeah. Right.
And then the one I'll give, if you're an aspiring data scientist, and again, I come from a math stats background, so this is why I got drawn to this one, but it's called Introduction to Statistical Learning with Applications in R. And it's by 4 authors. For some reason, Tib Shirani is the one I always think of, but it's by James Whitten, Hasty, and Tib Shirani. So, and I might not have said those names right. I think I said one of them differently two different times, but that's probably my most foundational book, because a lot of my experience is in R and with statistical methods. So if you come from a math background, if you have a math degree, you have to read that one, because it'll teach you how to apply your math degree in a way that can help in the data science field. So that would be my suggestion from what I've read.
Sweet. Awesome. Well, dude, it's so good to catch up with you, buddy. Thanks for taking the time to talk to me. I think a lot of people are going to find this super valuable.